It started with a simple tarot reading. Sarah and I had always been interested in the supernatural, but we'd never taken it seriously. It was just a hobby until that night. We'd rented a cabin for a weekend getaway in the woods. The place was beautiful and isolated, the perfect setting for a break from our hectic lives. On the second night, we decided to try something new. I'd bought a tarot deck on a whim, intrigued by the idea of seeing what the future might hold. The deck was old, with intricate illustrations and a heavy, musty smell. I set up a small table in the dim light of the cabin's living room, and Sarah sat across from me, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism on her face. I shuffled the deck and began the reading. The first few cards were uneventful: the Fool, the Magician, the Empress, each one describing aspects of our lives with vague, yet strangely fitting insights. But then I drew the Tower. The Tower was a dark card, depicting a tall tower struck by lightning with figures falling from the windows. It signaled chaos, sudden upheaval. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at Sarah. "This doesn't look good." She tried to reassure me. "It's just a card. It doesn't mean anything." But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I finished the reading, and the remaining cards were unsettling too. The Ten of Swords, the Devil, the Moon. Each one seemed to amplify the sense of impending doom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the image of the tower in my mind, the lightning, the falling figures. I tossed and turned, but sleep wouldn't come. Sarah slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the storm of anxiety raging in my mind. At around 3 a.m., I heard a noise. It was faint, like a whisper or a scratching sound, coming from outside the cabin. I got up and went to the window, but there was nothing, just the dark expanse of the forest, silent and still. I tried to ignore it and went back to bed, but the noise continued, growing louder and more insistent. It sounded like someone or something scratching at the walls. Unable to ignore it any longer, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The forest was dense, the trees casting eerie shadows in the beam of my light. The scratching sound seemed to come from the back of the cabin. I moved cautiously toward the sound, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. When I reached the back of the cabin, I froze. The scratching had stopped, and in its place was a new sound, a low, guttural growl. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the area, but I couldn't see anything. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the back wall of the cabin, scratched into the wood, were symbols, strange, arcane symbols that matched those on the tarot cards. They were crude, but unmistakable. I turned to go back inside, but as I did, I felt a presence behind me. The air grew colder, and the growling intensified. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, the growling stopped, and the forest fell silent. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. I shook Sarah awake, but she was groggy and disoriented. "Something's out there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to get out of here." Sarah looked at me with a mix of concern and confusion. "What are you talking about?" I explained what had happened, but she was skeptical. "It's probably just an animal," she said, though her voice betrayed her own anxiety. We decided to stay up and keep watch, but the rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. By morning, the symbols had vanished from the wall, leaving only a clean, untouched surface. It was as if they had never been there. We packed up and left the cabin, but the sense of unease stayed with us. We drove back home, trying to shake off the lingering dread. A few days later, I received a package. It was a plain, unmarked box, and inside was an old tarot deck, identical to the one I'd used at the cabin. But this deck was different. Each card was marked with dark, intricate symbols that matched those on the cabin's wall. I opened the box, and a single card fell out. It was the Tower, the same card from our reading. But this time, it was different. The image of the tower was crumbling, and at the base of the tower were words written in a language I didn't understand. I turned the card over, and there, scrawled in red ink, was a message. "Your time is running out. The darkness is coming." Part 2. The Revelation. The message was clear, and it chilled me to the bone. I didn't know what it meant or who had sent the deck, but I had a feeling it was connected to what had happened at the cabin. Sarah was just as unsettled as I was. We tried to go about our lives, but the feeling of dread lingered. Every strange noise, every shadow seemed to heighten our anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was far from over. One evening, as we were discussing the tarot deck, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find an elderly woman standing on the porch. She wore a long, dark coat and had an air of authority about her. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," she said, her voice smooth but firm. I was taken aback. "Who are you?" Said, "I am a collector of sorts," she said, stepping into the house without waiting for an invitation, "and I've come to retrieve the deck." I hesitated, unsure of what to do. "We don't want any trouble. We found the deck and—" She cut me off. "The deck is not meant for ordinary people. It holds power and danger beyond your understanding. You have to return it to me before it's too late." The woman seemed to know a lot about the deck, and her demeanor was both reassuring and alarming. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. "Why? What happens if we don't?" Sarah asked. "The tarot cards are a conduit," the woman explained. "They can open gateways to other realms, to forces that should remain sealed. The cards you've seen have been disturbed, and their presence in your life will only bring disaster." I handed over the deck, feeling a mix of relief and fear. The woman examined it carefully, her face grim. "Thank you for returning it," she said. "But you must know that the danger is not yet over. The disruption you've caused has already awakened something that is now very interested in you." With that, she left, taking the deck with her. Later that night, the whispers returned. They were louder, more urgent, and this time, they came from inside the house. I could hear them clearly now. A chorus of voices crying out, pleading for help. The shadows in our home seemed to move and writhe, and a sense of oppressive darkness filled the air. The next morning, we found strange markings on our walls, similar to those from the cabin. The symbols were more elaborate, more disturbing. It was clear that the woman's warnings were not unfounded. Something had been awakened, and it was coming for us. We decided to reach out to the woman to seek her help. But when we tried to find her, she was gone. There was no trace of her or any information about her. It was as if she had never existed. And now, as the whispers grow louder and the shadows closer, we find ourselves trapped in a nightmare we can't escape. The darkness is closing in, and we're left wondering if there's any hope of saving ourselves. The tarot's warning was clear. Our time is running out, and we have no idea what will happen next.